All righty, welcome everyone. We're going to get started in just a second. We are going to show you a video.
Welcome to today's session, everyone.
We are PreMedCC, a student-led organization established in the fall of 2021.
Our goal as an organization was to create an online program for pre-medical students at community colleges and universities, with the hope of guiding the next generation of diverse and inclusive physicians.
And while we advertise our organization as being for community college students, our events are open to anyone.
We realize that finding guidance and mentorship in a pre-med journey can be especially challenging for first-generation pre-med students,
people that lack the financial resources, or just those who do not know people in the medical field.
One of the best parts about our events is that they are virtual, so you can do it from the comfort of your own home.
We typically have events on Fridays from 5 p.m. to 6:30 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, and on Saturdays from 11 a.m. to 12:30 Pacific Standard Time.
If you aren't able to attend the event, all of our sessions are uploaded on our YouTube channel.
Many of our sessions will end up with a Q&A with the speakers.
Any questions that you have, you may put it in the Q&A session on Zoom, and our team members will read them and have them answer.
After you have attended our event, you can log into our website and complete the quiz, which will contain questions pertaining to our session today.
If you score 70% or higher on the quiz, you will be awarded a certificate to show that you attended our session today.
If you want to stay connected with the upcoming events or just want to tell your pre-med friends about the PreMedCC, you can find us on Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, and TikTok as @PreMedCC.
Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for being here. Please allow me to introduce Madeleine Babb, our president here at PreMedCC. Madeleine began her academic career at Santa Barbara City College, where she majored in biological sciences and worked as a tutor for biology and pre-calculus classes. Her leadership roles while at Santa Barbara City College included president of the SBCC Biology Club and secretary for the Pre-Med Club. She then transferred to UCLA, where she graduated summa cum laude with a degree in molecular cell and developmental biology and a minor in genetics and society. Madeleine is currently working at Moss Surgery Histology Technician and has been accepted to medical school and is excited to be starting this upcoming summer. We also have with us here today our Executive Vice President, Trinity Papamandijaris. Trinity is from London, Ontario, Canada. She is a student athlete at the University of Guelph, where she is studying biomedical science, a varsity athlete on the women's basketball team, and is also currently doing research in concussions at her university. Trinity volunteers for causes such as animal rights, social justice, and the Canadian Red Cross. Thank you so much for being here and welcome.
Thank you. I will get us started by sharing the presentation, and then Madeleine and I are sort of going to trade on and off with talking, and then we'll have a Q&A at the end. There we go. I can start. Can everyone see everything? Can hear me? Sweet. Okay, so this is our PreMedCC presentation on MCAT studying. Madeleine's done one before. I've done a time management thing where I've sort of mentioned my MCAT studying, but it's been a while for both of us, so we're just sort of gonna collaborate and give you guys a rundown on what we did. It should be a little bit interesting because although we did use some of the same stuff, Madeleine and I by no means studied the exact same way. So you'll get to see what worked for different people and what might work for you. So as Veronica said, my name is Trinity. I'm a biomedical science major at the University of Guelph. I'm a student athlete, so I play on the women's basketball team. I've been playing basketball for a really long time, and I am Canadian. I think the only Canadian member on our team. So yeah.
And then, as Veronica said, I majored in molecular cell and developmental biology at UCLA. I didn't have enough room, so I just put molecular biology on that. And I'm getting ready to start medical school. And then I'm one of the very many Californians on the PreMedCC team.
You want to take this one, Madeleine, or do you want me to do this one?
I can go over this one. So just what is the MCAT? So the MCAT stands for the Medical College Admissions Test, and it is made up of 4 sections. So you have your biology, it starts off with chemistry and physics. Oh my gosh, wait, yeah. Chemistry and physics, then it goes into biology and biomedical science. Then you have CARS, which is critical analysis and reasoning skills. And then the final section is on psychology and sociology. So altogether, the test takes about 7.5 hours. It's very intense, and the score range can be 472 at the lowest and up to 528. And the average score is 500. So the test itself it's curved. So really the score you're seeing isn't based off of how many questions you got right or wrong, but really on how you're falling in this bell curve down at the bottom. And students that score on the average, the closest to what everyone else is getting, that'll be 500. And then the average medical student who's accepted to a program scores around 511. That's the average score. And then the absolute highest you can do is 528. So both Trinity and I scored in the 97th percentile, which is on that upper region. And we're just going to kind of go into what we did to score up there. So this is my MCAT study timeline. I graduated a little bit early from UCLA. I was able to finish my coursework in my winter quarter, and then I had all of spring quarter off. So I dedicated that time to volunteering and then also preparing for the MCAT. So I was very fortunate because I was done with school to be able to study full time during this period. So at the bottom, it says that I was studying for about 8 hours a day, 5 days a week for 3 months. That's an average. There were definitely some weeks where I did not study, and there were some weeks where I studied on the weekends. But for the most part, I really wanted to give myself a little bit of time off and not just be studying completely. I feel like if you're studying 7 days a week, you're going to get burnt out. I started studying in May 2021, and I did the Kaplan content books. I went through every single section in the Kaplan books, which we'll get into it later, but I don't think that's the most effective way to do it. It took me about 2 months, starting in May all the way through June, to finish the content review. I took my first full-length exam at the end of June. And then I started switching over to the AMC full-length resources. So from late June to August, I was just doing practice questions and full-length exams, which I did find personally to be more effective for me in studying for it. And then on August 7th, I had my test day.
So this is mine. So February 2022, I started my content review. So I used the Kaplan books just like Madeleine did. Went through every section of them. I think I skipped most of there's like a math portion at the end of Chem Phys. I skipped that because I figured I should be able to do basic math. I was still in a full course load and doing basketball at the time. So I sort of made time where I could and set the goal for myself that I was going on vacation at the end of April with my family. So I wanted to be done all of my content review by that point. I think I finished a couple weeks earlier. I definitely think it was a good time for me to do it, given where I was with my courses and what I had just recently completed and what was fresh in my mind. That definitely helped. And then, like I said, I went on vacation for about a week. I did absolutely nothing while I was on vacation for that week, and sort of prepared myself for this 2-month gauntlet of preparation hardcore. So May 6th, 2022, I did my first full length to see where I was at after doing all my content review. And then for the rest of May, I did full-time studying every day with practice questions. And I actually, being Canadian, our testing centers are a little bit more spread out, and we have quite a few people taking them. So I, unfortunately, despite being on that website the second it opened, was like 17,000th in line to register or something. So I had to go to a testing center that was about an hour away from my house. So I decided to actually stay at a hotel near the testing center, as opposed to having to worry about traffic commute, especially in the greater Toronto area where I was writing. I didn't feel like messing around with that at 7 in the morning, because you never know what can happen at the highway. On the end of June, I did my final full length on the 22nd, and then I tested 3 days later. And those 3 days in between, I did absolutely no studying. I figured there was no point in panicking myself out into thinking I didn't know something. So I basically checked into the hotel and had some lunch and went to walk around some parks for a couple days, and that's what I did. So like I mentioned, my content review, I mostly did the Kaplan books. I was actually lucky enough to have a family friend who had written the test not that long ago. So I got them basically donated to me as a sort of, I never want to see these books again kind of thing from the other person. So that benefited me, I guess. And then whatever little things that weren't really clicking, I supplemented with Khan Academy. And then I basically was best friends with the Miles Down MCAT Anki deck for the next little while. I did all the cards in that deck, which is a lot. It's like just around 3,000 cards, I think. So by the time I was done, I had done all of those. And that was basically the extent of my content review. And I think an important thing to note is that when you're in class and taking classes that are relevant to the subjects that are going to be on the test, don't think that's a waste of time, because the better you understand the concepts in your class, the easier your content review at the end is going to be. Like if you're not paying attention in class because you're worried about studying for the MCAT and you completely check out of your biochemistry class, that's like not very useful, considering biochemistry is a huge section on the test. So just keep that in mind.
Yes. Sorry. Sorry, my mom was bringing me coffee. So for my content review, it was similar. I was also using the Kaplan books, but I do want to say, I got the Kaplan books for free from a friend early in my community college career. And as long as you have Kaplan books that are after 2015, it should work for studying. So if you get them secondhand and, you know, they're from 2017, hold on to those books. They'll still be very useful. And what I did was, as I was going through my classes at the community college level, I would look through the Kaplan books after I'd finished my chemistry class and say, oh, I recognize this subject and I recognize this. And I think it's important, if you're able to get your hands on some Kaplan books, to look through them. They're really easy to find at secondhand stores or even just university libraries, or even, you know, people have them and are giving them away. So try to get your hands on them as early as possible and just like check your progress, because as Trinity was saying, it's really helpful while you're in those classes to kind of have an idea what will be on the exam and how it ties, what you're learning right now ties into the final MCAT. So I used Kaplan. Khan Academy also has a full free MCAT kind of section on the website where you can see the content that's going to be on it, which is really helpful. I personally really liked the MCAT Basics podcast. There were some subjects for me, I really did struggle with Chem Phys the most. So having the MCAT Basics podcast, they would describe it in the amount of detail that you need to know for the MCAT. You don't have to know, you know, p orbitals and all of those nitty gritty chem details. So I felt like this podcast was a good one to show you what you need to know and how it relates to biological systems, which is what the MCAT really is testing you on. And then I never used Anki. I wanted to try it out. Still haven't used it. I know I'm going to need it in med school, and Trinity has a session coming up on how to use Anki to study for the MCAT, which is, I'm going to go to that one because I have no idea how to use Anki. I'm definitely a little bit more old school, and I made my own Quizlet that I would put terms on that I wasn't familiar with or graphs on. And then also I made flashcards to really kind of memorize all of the physics formulas that you'll need to know. So I would show myself, I would write down the formulas and what it's used for, a practice question, just try to I'd have a little whiteboard and then I would write out the formula that corresponds with that card. So that's personally what worked for me.
So next section, we're going to talk about practice questions. So I think Madeleine and I have both emphasized that we might have spent too much time on content review and maybe not enough time doing all the practice questions. These resources that I used, bar Jack Weston and Khan Academy, are not free. However, I found that UWorld was by far my most worthwhile resource that I've spent money on. You definitely get your money's worth. I don't know how anyone could go through all the questions that they have in that question bank. I think I only made it, I want to say, except for a couple of sections that were a bit smaller, I want to say I only made it about 60% of the way through. And they have their subscription set up so that I only bought the smallest length, knowing that I hopefully wouldn't have to use it again and renew, because of course they want more money for that. So I set it up so that I had it for the 2 months. And I thought those questions were great. I think if you look at, and not that that's necessarily the best resource, but on MCAT subreddits and stuff, a lot of people say that a lot of the questions that they have tend to be a little bit harder. A few of the practice questions, I thought they were pretty representative overall. I also used the AMC bank, the big one that you can buy that has all the sections, not just the practice full lengths. And I thought that was really useful, especially leading closer to the exam. I did what I think is pretty common. A lot of people save that for the end, just because, you know, it's more representative. And then I did the daily Jack Weston Cars passage and whatever other passages they had for the day. And then Khan Academy a little bit, just again, when something wasn't sticking and they had to happen to have a few more practice questions that I could use that I had already used up on something else. And those were definitely my most used resources, I would say, in the order that they're listed. Like I said, UWorld, I think, was really what made it for me. And I would definitely recommend, if there's one thing that you're going to spend the money on besides the AAMC stuff, if you're really contemplating, I think that was a really good use of my funding for that.
Yeah, UWorld was one of the, I personally didn't use it, but I had heard really good things about it. I think I just, at the point where I was studying, it just wasn't an option at that point. I'd already spent a lot of money on other resources, but definitely check out UWorld. And then I used Kaplan. They had, I did buy a Kaplan bundle where it would have some full length tests as well as some practice problems, and I used those. I don't think they were super representative of the exam though, and that's what I've heard, is that UWorld definitely has a leg up on Kaplan in that regard, because they really do feel like you're doing practice questions for the MCAT. Again, the AMC, definitely get the bundle. You can choose to just buy full length exams, but if finances are a problem, the AMC also has some fee forgiveness programs where you're able to get things at reduced rates. So look into that, because I think having access to the entire bundle with all of the practice questions, all of the section bank questions, and the full length exams is going to be, it'll be very important. That's really the gold standard for studying materials. I also did Jack Weston, which is free. And then Khan Academy, which has some free questions. They're not as representative, but if you're really need to get some questions on just specific content, then Khan Academy is helpful for that.
The fee waiver also pays for a bunch of your, if you qualify for it, it's like valued at $3,700. It covers some of your applications as well.
Mm-hmm.
Did you guys do the four full length AAMC ones or the 6th one?
At the moment, it was only 4 when I was applying, but I think, is it 6 this year?
I think there's 6 now. Yeah.
Yeah,
6,
I think
5.
I don't think I had access to more than that either. I think that's also our next thing.
Yeah, full length.
Yeah. So I really scoured online to try to find which full lengths besides AAMC had the best reviews. I ended up going with Blueprint again. Not free, but I got a lot of I think I bought 4 from them and 4 from the AAMC, so I had 8 total. I think I only ended up doing 7, but the Blueprint ones I found definitely help. They also have the free diagnostic one, which is like half the length, so I thought that was helpful, so that I didn't have to sort of when I did that diagnostic sort of full length, I didn't have to sit through a full exam. It just gave me sort of an idea of a range that I would be scoring in. And I was happily surprised by the result it gave me. So that definitely gave me some confidence going forward. And then AAMC afterwards, which of course are old exams, so it can't really get more representative than people that are actually making the exam that you're going to be writing. But I definitely feel like the Blueprint ones prepared me for the AAMC, especially in the cars department, which everyone knows is pretty notorious. And I think we'll touch on that a bit later, but those were the 2 full-length resources that I used.
Can you guys also talk about pretty much every test prep company offers you a diagnostic and it's free. So if anybody ever tells you to pay for a diagnostic, don't do it, because all of them offered for free, the way to gauge it. Also, some of them have like 7-day 100-question access or any of those things, so you could try it out before you plop down $200 for it or something. But everybody has a diagnostic exam.
Yeah, you can get them. Even the AMC has a free diagnostics exam. It won't give you your exact score, but there's calculators online. I think it gives you a percentile score for the diagnostic, and then you can see where that falls. But again, it's a diagnostic, so don't worry too much about it. What I did for my full-length exams was I started off with Kaplan because my books came with I was able to get access to the questions that I was talking about earlier, and then also to some full length. It gave me access to 3 full lengths as well as a diagnostic exam, which again, you didn't need to take, you didn't need to pay for, but I wasn't very happy with my Kaplan scores. I felt they were a lot lower than what I was hoping to do. And then when I took a blueprint exam, it went up a little bit, but again, it was a lot lower than I was hoping. And then once I actually took the AMC full lengths, my score increased by probably like 10 points. So that's something to remember when you're taking third-party tests and full lengths, is that they want you to feel like you're not doing that well, because then you'll buy more resources to study more through them. Because if you're thinking, oh my gosh, I'm getting this score, which is 10 points lower than my goal, you might spend more money to keep buying more study materials. So I feel like the AMC, or I know for sure the AMC full length exams, my average on that was 2 points around my average for the actual exam. So that's going to be a better gauge of how you're actually doing, but really hold off on taking those full length exams because, as Trinity was saying, they're old exams. They are what you're going to see on test day for the most part. So you don't want to go through those before you're ready. You really want to study a bit before you take those exams, because once you've taken them, the content's still going to be in your head and it'll be hard to retake them.
Yeah, that's a good point Madeleine made. Like the blueprint ones I felt were pretty representative, but again, a bit deflated compared to when I went to AAMC, which I think is also a nice way of lining up these tests, because as you're getting closer to test date and you start doing the AAMC ones, you start to feel a little bit better about yourself, because for most people, their score goes up by a few points. So by the time you're actually starting, I think you feel like a little invincible, which was maybe not the best for me, but that's okay.
Yeah, it's a good little boost. I did want to add really quick, Blueprint also has an option to take section exams. So as I was saying earlier, I really struggled with Chem Phys. That was definitely my lowest section. So going into the exam, I had access to, I think it was like 6 Blueprint exams, and I didn't do all of them. I ended up just doing Chem Phys for all 6 of them, just to keep practicing that section and finding weak spots, which I'll talk about more. Here we, okay, so this is my day in the life MCAT studying. It's a little bit difficult because during content review, I was really just reading the books, the Kaplan books, and taking detailed notes on that for like 8 hours a day. And it was pretty brutal. I don't recommend doing that, but it's good to look through the Kaplan books and to kind of get an idea about which content's on it. But I think I have 300 pages of notes in my Google Drive. It's not necessary, especially for the topics that I already knew really well. So I think this is a better way to start personally. I would wake up, I'd give myself some time in the morning just to relax and kind of get online. And then I would start studying about 2 hours after I woke up. I would do the Jack Weston's daily cars practice. And then also I'd go through my Quizlet just to kind of get things going. Then, as I was saying before, I would study after I'd done my content review and after I'd started taking practice tests. I would have an idea of the topics that I was really still struggling with and didn't really understand as well as I needed to. So I would focus on those, spend a couple hours in the morning just focusing on those problems, those subjects, and then also doing practice questions. So as I was saying before, Khan Academy will have, an article about optics. And I would go through and really make sure I was understanding optics and how that works. And then I would take the practice questions on that. And that was all free through Khan Academy. After that, I would take lunch, have another little break. Then I would do the practice questions. I think doing practice questions is really helpful because it helps you find what topics you don't know as well as you think you do. Maybe you can read a section on it and be like, oh, this makes sense. But then to actually apply it can be more difficult. So I'd go through the AMC practice questions, or I would do the section tests, as I was saying, on Blueprint and go over those. Then in the afternoon, I like to take a walk. So that's when I would listen to the MCAT Basics podcast, which I really liked. I listened to a lot of it on the different topics I was struggling with. And I felt like it was definitely able to reframe everything into just to kind of put things in terms that made more sense and were more applicable to the exam itself, rather than, sometimes I would do things on like forces and gravity, and it would actually start to click when I was listening to someone explain it. And then I'd have a break. And then again, at the end of the night, I'd be watching TV or something, and I would just do one run through on my flashcards, writing out the formulas and just kind of putting all of that to memory.
I would like to emphasize that this was after I went on vacation. This is what my days look like. This is not what my days look like while I was still at school. Obviously, I had some other stuff to do. So I would wake up between like around 6:37. I wake up and have breakfast. I think Madeleine and I may be similar, is that I like to have a slower start to my morning. I'd rather get up a bit earlier and ease into the day rather than having to rush somewhere. I never understand the people that like wake up 20 minutes before they have to be in class. That just like stresses me out. And then
some of us really like that.
No. And then between 8 to 9, I would do by this point all the cards that were on my deck were ones that were due, not new cards. So I had completed all the new cards. So it was just ones that were due every day at this point. So I would do all the cards that were due for the day for that hour and sort of get my mind in the mindset of getting ready to do questions. And for the next couple hours, I would do Jack Weston and UWorld. And I sort of tried to structure my day in the order that the sections would pop up on the exam. So I would do Chem Phys in the morning and then cars, about an hour of each. And then I would take a walk. I was lucky enough to be doing my exam sort of in the summertime in Canada. So it was at least nice enough that I could go out and get a walk. In my room, it's long days in front of a computer. So getting out to do something where you're not staring at your screen really just gave me that sort of extra boost in the middle of the day. I think I would have burnt out a lot faster had I just stayed in that room for 8 hours a day. I think I would have gone a little bit crazy. And then eat some lunch, relax, do whatever I wanted, watch some TV. And then from 1 to 4, I would do biochem, psych soc, again replicating the order that the sections would pop up on the exam. I will say I enjoyed my afternoon more than my morning. I definitely found that biochem and psych soc were my 2 stronger sections. So that worked out nicely, that I could sort of get the really, really hard stuff out of the way and then have a little bit of an easier time in the afternoon. And then just because of how different every CARS passage can be, and you never know what kind of passage is going to come up, I really wanted to make sure that I had a good practice on each of the sort of subjects. Like I really was really thankful that I did not get a philosophy passage on my exam, because those absolutely wrecked me every time I did them, when they're talking about, what is reality, what is not. I'm just getting so lost. So I would try to just get a good grasp on every subject that they would be asking me about, whether that was history or anything. So I would do an extra hour of CARS at the end of the day. And then by 5 p.m., like sort of like a work day hours, I guess, I was done and I could do whatever we practiced throughout the summer. So I had practice. So again, try to do something a little bit active rather than sitting in my room, because I knew I was going to be doing that for pretty much 2 months. So I didn't want to be doing that all on my free time too.
So then full-length exams were definitely a lot different. So I, again, wake up, relax, give myself that time in the morning. I have here 7 a.m. to 7:30 a.m. I only did this once, which I actually drove to the testing center at my scheduled time, found parking, found where which exit I needed to take, because I was fortunate enough to live pretty close to my testing center. So I think this was really, really helpful for that, my very last final exam. I actually got up, went out there, and just to kind of have an idea about how it was going to be. And then I ended up driving over to a Starbucks to take the actual exam because I wanted to be somewhere public. So after at 8 o'clock, I would take the practice full-length exam, and I would take the same breaks that are given to you on the actual exam day. So you get a break in between the sections, and then there's a longer 30-minute lunch break between CARS and bio. So I actually did that, and I would eat my lunch. We'll go over this. I think Trinity and I were similar, where we kind of had very strict schedules and how we were going to do it. But anyways, after I took the actual exam, it's 7.5 hours. I would briefly look over all of the questions that I had missed. I feel like it's good. One of my friends is a psych major, and she told me you need to look over everything you missed because you don't want to accidentally imprint into your memory the wrong answer. So I would look over them really quickly just to see, okay, this is what I missed. And then the next day I would do a very detailed review on all of the test questions, even the ones that I'd gotten right. I'd look at it and be like, did I actually get this right? Or did I guess and get lucky, which happens? Or did I have the right reasoning behind it and, or the wrong reasoning behind it, but somehow got the right answer. So I would look over everything. And then the ones that I did miss, I had a Google sheet where I had the question, write out the question, write out the correct answer and why it's the correct answer, and just kind of go through that to really make sure that I was understanding everything and identifying those weak spots that I really needed to study. And it's like, I keep missing questions related to this topic. I think I need to sit down and really look over this topic closely.
So mine was a little bit similar. I would wake up and have breakfast around the same time. I took my practice full length in room 322 in my school library, and I think I should like go in like when I graduate and write my name on the wall or something, because that room was like where I lived for I wrote my full length on Fridays. So every Friday for 2 months I was in this room. And, like peeking through the door because my library didn't open till 8. And I'm sure the librarian never understood why I was there in the middle of the summer at 8 a.m. But lo and behold, that's where I was. I found that was definitely a good way to sort of wake me up. Again, it was nice outside. So I get a nice little sunny 15-minute bike ride to school, lock my bike up and walk up to the room. I did the practice full length. I took the breaks that they gave us. I found that was really helpful, a good way to clear your head. I'm a little bit notorious for, if you want to come to the session next week, you'll learn that I have a pretty good memory, which can be a curse sometimes because I can remember the questions and what I wrote, and then I can think, especially when you're doing the practice ones, since you have access to your phone, you could go Google and find out what you did wrong, but you're not going to do that on test day. So I would really just suggest putting all your other devices away. You're not going to have access to them on the day. So really try not to use them and just take the break to clear your mind. And then I would finish the full length by about like 3:34. I will talk about timing. So my timing during my practice full lengths was a lot. I would finish a little bit early. Actually, I just think, you're getting your results right away. There's not as much pressure. So you sort of I felt I was less likely to second guess myself during the practices than the other one, than the real one, because I knew I was waiting so long to get those results back. Whereas for this one, it was like, I know this, the stakes aren't necessarily as high. So I felt a little more confident to just put down an answer and move on. And then from the rest of the day, I would do whatever I wanted. It was a Friday, just hang out with my friends who were still in the city and just do whatever I wanted. And then again, next day, like Madeleine did, if I got something wrong, I would take a quick peek at it just to sort of reinforce the idea, just like Madeleine said. And then next day on Saturdays, I would spend, I want to say like around 3-ish hours going over the questions I got wrong and making sure that I knew why I got wrong. Because like Madeleine said, you'll get lucky on some guesses. You have absolutely no idea. And, it's a 1 in 4 chance. You've only got 4 options. So you click whichever one and you move on. And if you're doing that for a lot of questions, you're not going to score very well. So you definitely want to make sure that you know what you're doing wrong so that you can fix it. So how I mimicked test day when I was doing my practice full lengths, I was in a single study room. So it's literally like a 4x4 room with a desk and a door. And I locked it. And because it was in my library, it was pretty quiet. There was one day where someone had booked the room next to me to have a days-long meeting and was screaming on their laptop. So that was fun. And then one day I get to campus and there's construction. which is really loud. So that was also fun, but also prepares you for, what you never know what it's going to be like outside your testing center. I was also acutely aware that my testing center is right next to a major highway. So I knew I would be hearing some road noise, which doesn't necessarily bother me. I'm sort of used to it. But my quiet room was quiet 80% of the time, and the other times it wasn't. And that was a good distraction to sort of get used to. I also wrote every single test, and I've sort of kept up this habit now that I'm done even studying. I wear noise canceling headphones. I knew I was going to take the headphone option when I got to my testing center, and I wanted to get used to having them on my ears so that it wasn't painful. If you ever wear them, you'll notice that the pressure on the part of your ear can really start to hurt if you're not used to it. So I wanted to make sure I was used to it. I took all the required breaks. I would get up and take a lap around my floor in the library in my school. I wore the same clothes every time I wrote the test, same shirt, same pants, same shoes, because I wanted to make sure that it was comfortable. I wanted to make sure I knew what sweater I was bringing in case my room was cold, or if it wasn't cold, that I was going to be cool enough in what I was wearing. Which seems a little crazy, but you try to control for as many variables as you can. I've eaten the same breakfast. It sounds like such a psychotic thing to say, but I think I've eaten the same breakfast for going on almost 3 years now. It's really good. I'm excited to eat breakfast every morning. So that was never an issue, but I ate the exact same lunch every day too, because I knew I had to feel full. So that I wasn't hungry, didn't want to feel too full, didn't want to be drinking and so much water that I would have to go to the bathroom in the middle of a section, because I know I'm locked in there for an hour and a half. I didn't want to, there's so many articles you can find online of what foods to eat and what foods not to eat. Like, you don't want to eat something super sugary because it'll spike your blood sugar and then you have a bit of a crash. So I ate some like vegetables and some rice cakes and something else I think was my go-to meal. And then I started at the same time that I would write my test. So I knew I was testing in the morning. So I didn't really see any point in starting my test at 11 a.m. If I knew I was going to be starting it at 8, I wanted to just really mimic the timing as much as I could. And I really found that on test day, it felt like I had done it a million times. I was wearing the same clothes, eating the same food, wearing the same headphones pretty much. So it felt like I had mimicked it enough that it wasn't so stressful being in a different environment.
I'm really glad to hear Trinity saying that she ate the exact same thing because I also did. I ate the same breakfast and the same lunch every single mock full-length exam. I can't look at sweet potatoes, black bean, cabbage burrito without feeling my heart sink now, because that was what I ate. It was great. But again, starting at the same time. So my test, I took the 8 o'clock exam. So I have to get to the place at, I think, yeah, it was 7:30 actually. I can't quite remember if it was 7:30 or 8, but I took the morning exam. So I would start at that time. Again, take the required breaks. You really want to get your body on schedule. So if you're, having to pause the exam on the full lengths and go use the restroom, you can't do that in the actual exam. You can, but they check everything. They make you go through this security to get in and out of the room. So you don't want to waste precious time running to the restroom when it's going to take 5, 10, a couple minutes to do that. So get used to the schedule. For me, this was a big thing, was not listening to music. When I study, I do like to listen to music and I like to have something in the background. But during the exam, you can't. So this isn't normal studying. You really do want to be, I think as Trinity was saying, the noise canceling headphones is a good idea. I personally use them as well, and they were pretty uncomfortable. They're very bulky. So if you can get your hands on a pair of noise canceling headphones just to get used to the feeling of it, that would be really helpful. Another thing, I didn't put this on there, but I love coffee. I've got 2 cups of coffee in my hand right now. And when I'm studying, I love to have a coffee with me and make my drink, but you can't do that on the MCAT. So for me, that was a big thing, was not having coffee during the exam itself. I probably brought a thermos with me to the center, but just learn to take the full lengths without any water, any coffee, anything. Also, don't use calculator or formula sheets. This is on the MCAT, you don't get any of that. I know for a lot of people, the calculator is kind of a shock because there is math involved, but the math is very straightforward. It's usually 10 divided by 5. You do have to get comfortable with like exponents. I say that would be the only thing where try to get more comfortable with like exponent rules because they're really important for unit conversions. So that's the most difficult math involved, I would say. But again, once you like get those rules down, it's pretty straightforward. Put your phone on silent or in the other room, like Trinity was saying. It's not a good, you can use it on your breaks during the MCAT, but it's not a good idea. Can you? I can't remember actually if you're allowed to use it. No, you're not. Never mind. Sorry about that. Scratch it. So just put your phone in another room and don't touch it for the extent of your exam. What I used was I had an app called Forest where you get to plant a fake tree. And then if you go on your phone and start using apps, the tree will die. So for me, that was a really, I liked it a lot. I use it for studying all the time because I want to grow my beautiful tree and I don't want to have dead trees in my forest. So you can actually grow real trees with it too. So it's a pretty cool app. And then again, the same meals and snacks and a quiet space. So I was taking the exam in 2021. So my library at school was still not open. So I didn't have access to a quiet library study room. I had to take the exam, the practice exams in my apartment, which worked, but it wasn't as private. It was very private. And I felt like when I was at the actual exam that there was going to be people around me and, you're sitting, there's spaces in between everyone, but there's still other people in the room. So I think I said earlier, I took my last full length at a coffee shop at a Starbucks near my university that had little study cubicles. And honestly, that felt pretty similar to the exam itself. And for that one, I used the noise canceling headphones just to try to get a feel for how I'd be when there were other people around.
There's a question. So there's a question. Do you take your own headphones or do they give you one?
They give you headphones. So I practice with over-the-ear noise canceling headphones. Most testing centers give you access to both. When I got both over-ear and in-ear, when I got to my testing center, they only had in-ear noise canceling headphones, like the little small foam ones that you roll up and then extend in your ears. So I sort of had to take that and run with it, even though that's not what I had practiced with, which was unfortunate. But they provide them to you because you'll notice that when you go, they're really big on security. So if you're taking something in, they're assuming you're cheating with it. So they wouldn't let you take anything in that's not literally on your body.
And that's a really good point. Jubin put in the chat, the MCAT testing conditions. I would really recommend going through this because I remember during my check-in, there were little things that I didn't think about. I was wearing a hair elastic, for girls, we want to pull our hair back, or if you have long hair and you want to pull it back, make sure you have a very thin hair elastic because there was somebody who had a scrunchie on her wrist that she was using to pull back her hair and they made her give that away because technically it's a scrunchie is kind of a bigger piece of material and she could be sneaking in something through that. So there's a lot of little things that you need to be aware of. Luckily somebody gave her a hair elastic so she was able to pull her hair back, but just little things like that you might not expect. So I would recommend, especially as you're getting closer to your exam day, to look through those testing conditions and make sure what you're wearing is compliant.
Yeah, and like Madeleine said about the coffee, her studying with coffee, I study with this water bottle. This is I call it my emotional security water bottle. This thing goes with me everywhere. I have 2 different ones. I probably drank 4 of these minimum a day. I'm a huge water drinker. So getting used to not having water for 1.5 hours at a time was really difficult for me because it's just sort of always there and I'm sipping on it. You see me do it a few times in this presentation. It's just sort of a habit. So really try to restrict that stuff because you're not going to be able to do it. And the reason I say not having access to your phone or another device, especially when you're doing the practice full lengths, is because all of those answers someone has put into a Quizlet. So the second that you are stuck on a question, you're like, oh, I know it. I'll just Google it. And then you verify your answer and you're like, oh, sweet, I got that one right. But it's did you get it right because you actually knew it? Or did you get it right because you were about to second guess yourself and switch your answer because you thought you had gotten it wrong, but then you checked the answer online? So those were kind of helpful afterwards, especially if some of the AAMC or blueprint for my case explanations were just way too lengthy and I got lost in them and someone else could explain why. I found those helpful. But knowing that those could be accessed at the click of a button was really tempting sometimes, and you're stuck on a question, then you just sort of, gaslight yourself into thinking that you would have gotten it anyways, when in reality you might not have. So just be honest with yourself while you're taking the exams. Your score is your score, and it feels way more rewarding to get a score and improve by your own knowledge improvement rather than looking it up on Google and pretending like you knew the answer when maybe you actually didn't. So just keep that in mind. And then we'll go over some general tips. I think mine are the first couple, and Madeleine added some more. So don't spend too much time on content review. This is especially for all the science majors out there. If you're someone who is happening to doing a different major and is sort of just taking the prereqs, and maybe you haven't gotten them all and you're a bit weaker in some areas, that's maybe a good reason to spend a little bit more time on content review. But if you're taking your exam at a point where you've taken all the courses that are recommended to take before the MCAT, you should have seen all this content before. So it really should just be a refresher rather than pretending you're studying starting from scratch. I think that's what people miss sometimes. Do as many practice questions as possible. The only way you know if you know the material really well isn't if you can regurgitate sentences upon sentences of the information about it. It's whether you can read a question, retrieve that information in your brain, and apply it to the right answer. So do as many of them as possible. Even my TikTok was like all MCAT TikTok for the entire time I was writing the exam, because your phone's listening to you and it knows what you're doing, whatever. So little questions would pop up on my TikTok, and I would, just for the 1 minute that I happen to be scrolling through, might as well be productive. I would answer the one question, and, that would make me feel better about the other 40 minutes I was consuming media that was not helping me whatsoever. And honestly, some of them still pop up, and I still challenge myself to answer them. And you'll be surprised how much stuff stays with you when you've done it for that long. Start doing CARS practice early. So CARS is a skill that's independent really of all your other courses. You're not really going to prepare for it by reading a book. I didn't read the CARS Kaplan practice book at all. I found a couple online resources to get some strategies as to whether I should highlight or not, underline or not, strike through or not. And I sort of found what worked for me through some trial and error. I think the first strategy I tried was just highlighting the main point of each paragraph. And that didn't end up working for me at all, because I would be so focused on finding what's the main point of this paragraph that I wasn't actually reading the rest of it. And the earlier you start, the better you'll get at it. So even before I was doing all the content review questions for the other subjects, I was doing a CARS passage for Jack Weston like every day, or anything I could find online. And register early to get the testing center you want, because like I said, I was a little bit far away. I did everything in my power to be on that website as soon as I could. And, you log on your 16,000th in line. What are you going to do? Registration opened at noon, and I was on the website at noon. And that's just sort of how it worked out. But that definitely added some more stress. Funny story, I drove to the testing center 3 times to make sure I knew how to get there. The highway was under construction, so it was a bit different than what Google Maps told me. I felt confident, I knew where I was going, and the morning of, I missed my exit. So I was convinced that I was going to be late. They weren't going to let me in. So having a testing center that would have been 10 minutes from my house would have really helped, especially knowing the roads, as opposed to having to use some geolocation stuff. So I had timed it out so that I could listen to music on the way there and sort of get myself hyped up. And then I missed my exit, and that music went right off, and I was like white knuckling it to the testing center. Ended up being fine, and you kind of just have to put that behind you. But definitely don't just wait around and then end up having to go to, especially for someone in the state, like 4 states over. I've heard of people doing that. Like you take some plane to go write your exam. Like it's absolutely crazy. So pay attention, subscribe to the AAMC email list so that you know when the testing stuff is going to open up, and be on there the second that you can, because they go quick.
Yeah, these ones, the last 3 were ones I put, but I do want to, a lot of these tips I 1000% agree with, especially the content review. We talked about it earlier. If you took those classes and you did well in those classes, don't spend too much time on content review. I honestly feel like I spent about 2 months on content review and only a month and a half on practice tests and practice exams. And I really, really regret that. I feel like it wasn't the best use of my time because I didn't get to finish all the AMC practice questions, which I've learned so much more from. So I think it's definitely useful to have the books and to look through them, but you don't need to be super detailed taking really, really detailed notes. You're going to find out a lot more about where you are by taking practice questions. So yeah, I think that's like my biggest regret for the exam. And I'm still happy with how everything went, but that just wasn't a good use of my time. And if you're a science major and if you're taking all of the prereqs on the MCAT, like it's not the most important thing you can be doing. It's taking those practice questions. Yeah, and registering early, I've also heard of people flying multiple states to take the MCAT, and that's so much money. You're already spending, almost $300 to register for the exam itself, then to add on a plane ticket and hotel rooms. Sometimes it's unavoidable, but if you can try to get on as early as possible, and then also I believe there's kind of like standby seats available. You're able to sign up for if there's a test that you want. You can sign up for like a alert where if spots become available, you can try to sign up then. They'll send you an email. So look into that on the AMC. And then these last 3 points are the ones that I wanted to kind of touch on a bit. So a lot of the MCAT is actually interpreting, especially in the bio section, and even the psych-soc section is interpreting journal articles. So if you are taking the MCAT and you've only taken intro bio classes, you might want to start looking at some scientific journals, especially if your classes didn't cover that, because a lot of times you do have to interpret tables and you have to interpret just like it looks like a journal article, and you'll have to interpret some of the information in that. So I was really lucky that in my major, that was what most of our discussions was really going through journal articles and like learning how to identify, okay, this is a protein of interest, this is this. But if you haven't had that yet, the MCAT can be difficult just because it's in a different format than, a passage. It's a passage, but it's more like an article. So I would recommend starting to read those just if there's something you're interested. A lot of schools will have it so that you can access articles or journals for free. So just try to get comfortable with that. And then also, this is a big thing, and this is something we've talked about with deans of admissions. I feel like this is one of our PreMedCC like points of don't take the exam for practice. You do not want to just sign up for the MCAT before doing review, before studying. If possible, you want to take the MCAT once. And you want to get the score that you want that one time, because med schools can see everything. So they can see if you took the exam and got a below average score, below that 500 point, and you didn't study at all, weren't doing anything, you didn't practice, and then you retake it and do better. That looks good, but at the same time, a lot of schools will even average your 2 scores. So if you've taken one before you've done any preparation at all, and then take another one and do really well because you actually studied for it, they'll average it to a middle point, which, it's avoidable. And I've heard of a lot of people taking the exam to say, oh, well, I just want to see how it goes, and I want to see what it's like, what the MCAT's like before I actually start studying for it. And that's just not the best use of your time. The AMC has full-length exams that you can take to see what the MCAT's like and to see how it feels. So it's really important to try to take it once if you can. If you have to retake it, that's totally fine. That happens a lot, and med schools know that. But to see, those giant score, to have really huge gaps between the 2 scores because you just took it once without preparing, they can tell when that happens, and it's just best to avoid that.
Yeah, there's also a lot of these like chat rooms and blogs and stuff that you should take the practice just to see, and that's like a major no-no. Like, only do it once and only do it when you're prepared. Like, it's not for,
and don't waste your money. I mean, that's, it costs a lot of money to sign up for the MCAT, especially if you're having to travel to take the exam. It's just not the best use of your time.
Yeah. It's also just like a huge investment into your, like, why do it once and then decide, oh, I'm going to invest all the time to study and then do it again? And then you see the score you got, you could have just gotten that score the first time had you just studied all the way through. So definitely don't just take it to do it. and just really prepare as much as you can. It's exhausting. It's a long time. You feel like a huge weight has come off you and you're finally done. But when you do all that work and you get the score you want, it feels like it was so much more worth it rather than, you know, for lack of a better term, half-assing it and getting a mediocre score, because you're going to have, if you really are serious about it, a lot of the time you're going to have to do it again. So you might as well just put 100% into it and get 100% out of it and know that that was your best and what the best that you could manage to do. And that's going to be different for everybody. Some people are just really great at taking standardized tests. And those people definitely exist. Like you see those people that go and they barely studied and they get like a 524. You're like, okay, well, you know, no one's best friends with those people, right? Because that's just frustrating. But for one of my friends, like the best he could score was the best he could score, and he had to be happy with that and just knew that that was going to restrict him a little bit. But he's going to med school and he's doing great. So just know that, like, we've had so many deans of admission, it's a holistic review. So just do the best that you can. And if the best you can is what the score is, the deans will know that that was the best you did if you studied hard. But like Madeleine said, don't just have this score looming over you for no reason when it wasn't necessary. So yeah, and now that's sort of our spiel. I'm sure lots more questions will get answered in the Q&A. I think Madeleine has something to add.
I have one last thing to add. I forgot to put this on, but we had talked a little bit earlier. You took a vacation and then you got to your hotel room and you relaxed for a few days before the exam. And I took a vacation a week before my MCAT because it had been planned for months. And I didn't study once during that. And I didn't study the day before my exam. And I feel like this is kind of something to keep in mind when you're at the finish line and you're about to take the exam. There's a tendency to want to try to cram everything in and learn, cover everything and make sure you're 100% prepared. But I think that it's really important to take some time for yourself before this big exam, to give yourself some time to calm down and to get into a good mental space before you're going into it. If you're coming into it with so much anxiety and so much, I need to get the MCAT there, people call it a mile wide and an inch deep, because you can study forever and still there's going to be things on that exam that just come out of nowhere. And you are like, I never have seen this before in my entire life. It's unavoidable. So I think giving yourself some grace and giving yourself a little bit of time, a couple days before the exam to stop studying and just to give yourself, you've done everything you can do. And I definitely have the tendency to want to cram, especially for other exams. You might be able to cram the night before for a bio test, but for the MCAT, there's a point where you just have to trust the process and know that you've spent a couple of months really working your hardest and learning what you can, and then give yourself some grace just to be in the right mental space for the test.
And generally speaking, doing the practice test and like following the points that we've outlined on this PowerPoint, you should know the general range that you're gonna score in. For most people, they don't get their MCAT score back and go, oh my gosh, that's way lower than I've been doing on my practice exams, or oh my gosh, that's an 8-point jump from what I've been doing on my practice exams. If you've mimicked the conditions and you've practiced like you're going to take the test, in general, most people should know generally what their score is going to be coming out of it. So just have faith in your preparation, because that should be reflected on your actual score. Mine, I think Madeleine said hers was within 2 points. I think mine was around the same, within 2 points of what I had sort of scored the range on the other ones. So you should know what your score is likely going to be going in, bar some crazy like catastrophe happens. But yeah, just have faith in your preparation and prepare well, and you'll get what you get, and hopefully it'll be a good score.
Yep. Okay, looks like we have some questions in the Q&A.
Yeah, so the first question, someone is asking, does MCAT exams provide accommodations for those with learning disabilities?
Yes, so I think Jubin put this in the chat. The MCAT they do accommodate. The AAMC accommodates for if you have any sort of testing requirements or needs. That's an option. You'll definitely want to, I believe, you need to fill out all of that information. I think it's 2 to 3 months. You want to submit your request for accommodations as early as possible, within probably 3 months or before 3 months of taking the exam.
So if you have a learning disability, make sure you read through that section with the what is it? Fine comb nail? No.
Fine-tooth comb.
Yeah,
Fine
fine tooth comb, because it's like a lot, and you have to like it's very detailed, and they like stick to it like it's a legal document because of like all the legal things they have to do. So make sure if you are like if you're going to community college or even at UC or CSU, you have a disability office, make sure you print all that and you go in there with them, because it's really like it's a lot. It's like a full on and it's not all on one page. You got to jump through different pages. So make sure you go through it, like read through it a couple of times, and don't do it like 2 weeks before, because some of them you have to like submit the form 60 days, 90 days, and some of them like they need like people that have tested you like 3 years ago. So make sure like you have those documentation, like everything it has to be done like it's just a lot. Like you can't just like skim through it on your phone and say, oh, it's all right, I'll do it next week, I'm taking the exam next month. Like you gotta like look through it. And I cannot like stress that enough. If you have a learning disability and you need those resources, and there are people that get into medical school with learning disabilities, but make sure you go through that. Make sure you go through that.
Yeah, I think that's a really good advice to go through it with a counselor, an academic counselor, because they're gonna see things that, you know, that's what they do all the time, is be trained to recognize the little details that might be tricky. So going through it with a counselor would be really helpful, just to make sure that you get all the accommodation that you need. I think they offer 1.5 time, they offer twice time. So, and I kind of lucked out. There wasn't anyone who needed accommodations during my test. And I was very lucky to be put in the private room versus the large testing room. So I know that there is a private room that you can be in when you're taking the exam.
Another question that came up was if you can share how you reviewed your exams.
I can actually share my screen for the doc that I was talking about. I think in the Kaplan book, they had something about it, about studying, creating like a Google sheet. So I'm going to pull mine up. It'll just take me a second. In the meantime, maybe Trinity, if you want to talk about how you reviewed yours.
Yeah. So I would, like I said, I think Madeleine did the same thing. I would take a quick peek the day after my practice full lengths and just see what I had gotten wrong. So I sort of had an idea, not doing detailed by any means, but just seeing what I put, what the right answer was, and going, oh, well, didn't get that one right, revisit tomorrow. And I would wake up the next morning. Saturdays were pretty chill. Sunday was completely off. I did nothing on Sundays. And I would go through each section and review what I got wrong. Sometimes it's as simple as you used the wrong formula or you messed up a unit, and those are dumb mistakes and you try to minimize that. Like it's really frustrating when the correct answer in the chem phys section was 0.01 and you put 0.001, like, you know, that's going to happen sometimes, but just really try to pay attention to that. I would say my most detailed review was on cars. Like I said, biochem and soc were really my strongest sections. So fortunately, I didn't really have a lot to review that was wrong. Typically, I actually really enjoyed those sections, especially psych soc, which kind of was a surprise to me. And I took a psych class the semester before I wrote, which was developmental psychology, which I thought was really applicable to the MCAT. A lot of the questions are about childhood development and Piaget's stuff and operant conditioning, classical conditioning, which all was covered in that class. And I hadn't taken anything since a first year intro psych. So I decided to take that in my third year, just as a bit of a refresher as an elective. I really enjoyed the class. It got me in the frame of mind of reading articles like that, like Madeleine said. And what I would sort of do, especially with cars, I would reread the passage re-look at the questions, not looking at my answers. I would have a couple of my friends write a doc out for me. So I would read the passage and then I would have the questions in front of me because when you're looking at it and you see the answer, you're automatically just going to go, oh yeah, I know the answer. I would have one of my friends write out a blank doc for me on the ones I got wrong. And I would do it again and try to just look at it with a fresh set of eyes. And if I got the answer right that time, I would know maybe, okay, I was rushing, especially when you get to the last part of the section when you're not so great at timing yet, it can feel really rushed. And if I did get it right the second time, I would go back and read the explanation. Most of the testing softwares give you a 3-paragraph explanation on why A, B, and C were wrong, but D was right. And I would go over that and try to logic with their explanation. And like I said, most of the answers for especially Blueprint, if you put the question verbatim into Google, Quizlets will come up, people's Reddit stuff will come up, and you can get 10 different explanations for the same question and sort of just find the one that resonates with you as to why it was wrong, and try to move on. And then I would sort of identify weak points and then make that an emphasis in the next few days for finding out. So I think I really liked organic chemistry, which is like,
what is wrong with you?
For most people hate it. I loved that class. I say to my friends all the time, if I could go back and major in something different, I would major in organic chemistry. I really liked it. Gen Chem at that point was so far gone in my mind that I knew the concepts were sort of simple, but weren't necessarily being retrievable because it had been 3 years since I had taken it. And I took Gen Chem 2 during COVID. So let's be honest, I was like not really paying attention and the grades were kind of just really easy to get. So I was like, whatever. But I think paying good attention in your class and taking good notes, because sometimes the notes that I would find that I had written in those courses made way more sense to me than someone's explanation online. So when I was like, why did I get this wrong? And I can remember like, oh my God, I did that in my organic chemistry class. I would go read those notes and be like, oh, that's why. So that's what I did.
Yeah, the other thing is I put that document in the chat about, basically it had every single time, it's called the MCAT 2015 content. It has every single subject in every single section of the MCAT. I would just take that, and as you're taking like I did it for when I was taking psych and soc, I just like made my own little study guides for those, and the same thing for Gen Chem and OChem, because I know what I know, and I think I create the best study guides for myself, and I don't really care like if anybody else can understand it. And I've used Shaman's outlines and stuff, and they're okay. They're just really long, and I like some things I don't know already, and I don't want to have to look at it again because I get confused again. So there's a lot of things you could do today. Like you don't need to wait until you do it. And so create your own content for yourself. And as Trinity said, like there is internet, there's Google and all these different things, but it's not always right. Like if you look at Quizlets that are out there, like I found it, and to be honest with you, all of us have taken quizzes online that have looked on Quizlet, and we've seen like their errors. And so you don't want to like spend all this money and time and learn the wrong thing, because for you to unlearn something wrong takes a lot more. That's why bad behavior is so hard to break. And so create your own content. Like if you know how you learn for your own brain. And so so download that and look at that and look at that resource, and it's free. It's 100% free. So I'll let the other people that are much smarter than me talk.
I'm putting my Quizlet, my personal Quizlet, into the chat just because this was my MCAT folder, and this is what works for my brain. Everyone's different, but I like Quizlet a lot, and I've been using it pretty consistently. So that's just a little fun thing. But I'm going to share, I put this in the chat earlier. This is just how I would review my exams. So I'm just going to do that really quickly to kind of give you guys an idea of what I was talking about earlier. So this is available from Reddit. The pre-med or MCAT Reddit had this Google sheet, and I already sent that in the chat so you guys can access it there. But basically, this is how I would go through. This is my third full length. As you can see, this color is the Chem Phys, and that was always, I struggled with Chem Phys. It was definitely my weakest section. And it was fine. I ended up doing pretty well on it just because I learned how to approach these questions. A lot of times the way that they're worded makes them seem really complicated, but once you get those the small details and like realize what they're asking, it makes a lot more sense. So again, I probably took I think I did over 10 Chem Phys sections, even though I only did 7, 8 full length exams. I did extra Chem Phys sections just because I knew it was going to be a problem. Let's see, it's the type of problem. So calculating pressure from data in a table, I just mean median mode. And I made an error there, and the correct answer and why the answer correct, why I was wrong, and then a strategy for next time. So just kind of telling myself, okay, if I see a similar problem, what am I going to do next time? Use the info not in the data set, or I don't even know what that means. But at the time, going through each question, it made sense, and it made me really kind of look at my tests a little bit more closely. It can be tricky. I think you really have to look through and see what you did incorrectly. And a lot of times, this is one of the big things I've seen people say online is you really do want to go through those exams with a fine-tooth comb. You don't want to just kind of move on to the next full-length exam, because this is, we learn better from our mistakes and our failures, and being able to see, okay, this is what happened. This is why I made that mistake. It trains you to do it, to recognize it next time and be able to have a better strategy. So I'm going to stop sharing that, but I really do recommend using that worksheet. And it just is, for me personally, I felt like it was a way to go through things a little more carefully and really give it the respect and the time that it needs in order to learn from it and move forward.
Do both of you recommend taking a practice exam before actually practicing for the MCAT, or just practice and then take the practice exams?
I took my first practice exam after I was done my content review, just because I wanted to know sort of a little bit of everything that could possibly be asked and see where I was at. I would definitely recommend doing lots of practice exams. There's lots of free, sort of half-length ones available, which can be helpful. I would say, I think some people do it before they even do content review. It's sort of up to you. I would definitely don't waste the ones you've paid for when you don't feel confident, because like Madeleine said, your brain takes a little while to forget those exams. So you'll remember the answers. And if you go to take it back in 2 weeks, you'll probably just answer some of the questions because you remembered what the right answer was, sort of thing. But I would say just do as many as you can and space them out with enough rest in between and time to address issues before you take the next one. Don't just sort of do three days in a row, because that's also not realistic.
Yeah, I think taking a diagnostic exam, as Jubin and Trinity were saying, those things are free. You can take as many of those as you want. You're not paying for them, and they're half length. I think it will. I didn't do that personally, and I kind of regret it because I jumped right into content review, versus if I had taken some diagnostic exams, I might have known already I need to spend more time on Chem Phys, and I don't need to, everybody's different. Chem Phys was a real struggle for me. Cars personally wasn't that was one that I was lucky to not have to study for as much. And if I had known that, I went through the Kaplan Cars book, and there was no reason to do that. So I think if you take a diagnostic exam before your content review, will kind of have an idea of what you need to be focusing on moving forward. But don't use the one that you paid for. Those ones, the long full length ones, they're brutal. They take forever, and don't pay for that. You don't want to use the free short ones for that.
Another question that came up was, were there times where you felt unmotivated to do the study plan that you had planned for that day? And if so, what did you do?
I had a friend who was planning to write about a month later than me. She ended up deciding not to, and is actually applying to physiotherapy school, which doesn't require the MCAT. So She knew right away it wasn't for her. And we sort of were at odds about it because I actually really enjoyed studying for this test. I know that might sound weird to say, but I liked doing the practice questions. I enjoyed that I got to just sort of practice my way through it, and rather than having to study, and then just do one test, sort of like lots of little tests over. And I thought it was rewarding to see my progress. And I think, like I said, when I did my first diagnostic, I was surprised at how well that first one went. There were definitely days where I was tired and, you had other stuff going on. Like that wasn't the day plan that I laid out wasn't necessarily 100% followed all the time. Sometimes, I had a family event to go through and there was no studying in the afternoon because I had to be somewhere. And I think just keeping in mind that if you're feeling so tired that the quality of studying is not going to be great, then it's really not worth pushing through. I think developing stamina is definitely part of the study process for the MCAT. It's by far the longest exam I have ever taken, still to this day. But do that slowly over time. Don't just, if you're sitting in front of your computer and nothing's registering, then it's just not your day. And take the break that your body is telling you that you need and your brain is telling you that you need, because it's not going to sink in anyways, and you're just probably going to have to revisit all of it another day. So that would be my advice, is that try to push through sometimes, but some days it's just not going to happen, and that's totally fine. And that 4 hours of studying you're missing is really not going to make or break your score at the end of the day.
Yeah, and I think the only thing that I would add is that, like, it is daunting. Like, it's kind of like running a marathon. If you have never run and you say, all right, I'm going to go do a marathon, it's daunting. And so you do it in chunks. You've obviously have gone through college and passed some really tough classes. So you know how to study. You just need to be organized. And I think, like, one of the things I'm always like very appreciative of Trinity is, like, she's a really busy person and she's involved in a lot of things. She plays D1 basketball, which, like, I can't even play D37 basketball. So she's very
still busted though, Juven.
Huh?
My bracket is garbage.
So yeah. So I can't, so she's like 20, 25 hours a week just doing that. And it's not just practice and playing, but it's lifting weights and doing all the different stuff. So anything in life, yes, if you sit there and look at the MCAT, it is daunting, but you take chunks. You say, all right, I'm going to do this today and have goals and being motivated. Because yes, if you are sitting there, you don't have any goals. Like, I always have like these note cards in front of me. It's like, these are the things I'm going to accomplish today. And like the highlight of my day, it's kind of like very, and maybe minor is on the thing. I'm not going to say that, but I get very excited when I cross something out that I need to do. It feels like I feel ecstatic. I feel very emotional. And so, like, take those, take those little wins. So then you build up on those wins. Kind of the same thing with like running a marathon. You don't go out there and decide to run 26 miles. Like, you will have a heart attack at some point. So you say, all right, I'm going to go do a half a mile. I'm going to go do, this stuff. And so in motivation, I think motivation is such a hard thing, because if you're like looking at a big, mountain in front of you, you can't climb it in one day. So you take little bits of it. And sure enough, after doing a couple of, bits of it consistently, you've moved forward. And so I think that's the only thing that I would tell you, just be organized. And some of the questions people ask, like, well, how many hours did it take you to study? It's like, well, like, Trinity and Madeleine are both like much smarter than I am. So if it takes them an hour to do something, it takes me 2.5 hours to do it. And that's just something you got to know about yourself. And so I'm highly dyslexic. So takes me a long time to process and read something. But it doesn't mean that, I'm not as smart as them, but I still can, but we all have different gifts as well too. So yeah, so I think like the motivation part of it, just go for the small wins. You don't need to, you don't show up and take a full length exam practice the first day. You maybe say, okay, I'm going to do 2 hours today, or, so yeah, that's the only thing that I would say is just do small bits.
And to add on to that, I did really struggle with motivation during the content review part of my studying. For me, it felt daunting. Like I'm fine. I love school. I love learning, but I think because it felt like I was going through all of those books with a fine-tooth comb and having to really understand each chapter, it was a little bit exhausting. And I really did, that was the most difficult part for me. And now that I look back on it, I say that wasn't the reason it was so difficult, and the reason it felt so bad was because it wasn't helpful and it wasn't what I needed to do to prepare. And I can see that now, having done it. But when I was in it thinking, I have to go through every single book, I have to read every chapter and take detailed notes on all of this. And it felt overwhelming, and it didn't feel good to do all of that. And now I'm done. And I liked doing the practice questions because it was chunks, it was spaced out. And I was really, when you are starting the day thinking, I have to read 3 chapters in this book and write detailed notes for them, and I don't know what it is, versus to be like, I didn't understand, this thing about mirror lenses. So I'm going to spend today really understanding mirror lenses and doing practice problems for that and targeted. That was a lot more motivating because I was actually seeing results from it. I was really tackling an issue instead of having this big fuzzy, I need to do everything and I need to read everything. So I think if you're feeling unmotivated, something you could do is say, is this study style really working for me? If it's making me feel this bad, maybe this isn't the best way to approach this problem. The MCAT's a huge exam and there's a lot of stuff on it. So I think for me it almost felt like I was out in the weeds looking over this. I had to do everything. And it's just, that was overwhelming. So I think maybe examine your studying style and look and see, is this really work? Why am I studying like this? And are there any steps I can take to maybe improve that?
The next question is, for the car section, do you practice with any text or scientific text specifically?
With the car stuff, I did the free daily Jack Weston passage, and then I did all the practice questions that were available to me through UWorld and AAMC. Madeleine, I think was earlier talking about reading scientific articles, and that was more helpful for the other sections. The car section is really the only one that's not really structured like a scientific article. It's like an 5-paragraph passage from the middle of some random book you've never heard of, and they want you to understand everything about it, and that's kind of how it goes. But getting used to reading scientific data and the way that the wording that they use to present it, because unless you're used to reading that sort of style, it doesn't really register right away. It's really confusing to read, and they're talking about all these specific proteins, and next thing you know, you've got a 12-digit like code name for this protein. You're like, what the heck is that? So I think cars is its own thing, and then learning to read for the other sections is its own thing because they are different.
Yeah, I agree completely. Cars is very random almost in a way. Like you don't know if you're gonna have a philosophy text or an archaeology text, or maybe they're gonna, I think I remember one of the ones about the monks on the monastery and the island in the middle of nowhere. That was on an AMC test. So like it can be really, really random. And a lot, I think with cars, Jack Weston was helpful because it was the closest to what cars actually was like. It's a lot more of interpreting what you're reading and identifying main ideas and like what the author is trying to say and what their argument is. So if you've taken humanities classes or any like English literature or composition classes, those are going to be helpful for just kind of learning to look at beyond what's on the page. And so you don't want to like copy what's on the page. You really want to think about what are they trying to say and what's their message in all of this. So yeah, cars is nice because it isn't really any science. You don't have to have a science background to do cars, versus biology. Those are the ones that are going to be journal based. And those are the ones where you do have to understand, okay, what are they in this experiment? They're knocking out this gene, and this gene's an inhibitor. So if they knock it out, that means you're going to see an increase in that's what that's how the biology, the passages are. It's a lot of kind of understanding how experiments are run. So I think if you haven't seen any scientific articles and if you haven't done any any of those, that you really do want to start familiarizing yourself with journals. And one way you could do that is look to see if your school has a journal club. A lot of universities, definitely transfer universities, will have journal clubs where you can go and start to read those. You read the article beforehand, and then you come and you discuss the experiment, and you discuss the results, and you get to really talk about and interpret those articles. And if your school doesn't have one, or if you're still at a community college, maybe think about making one. I mean, that would be something really, really useful. Being able to talk to people about it and hear other points of view would be helpful. Science professors, I'm sure, would love to be your advisor. And then you get to say on your AMCAS application, I started my school's journal club. So things like that, if that's available, I think that would be a really helpful way to study for that.
Yeah, I would say that reading the science-based stuff is more analysis. They gave you the information and they want you to be able to pick it out. Whereas a lot of the CARS stuff is more synthesis. They give you information and they ask you something that's not related to any of the information that's actually in words on the page. You have to be able to sort of synthesize what they're asking and then use the information to sort of build a question up in your head and answer it. So I would say that's the main difference. And you can do okay in the CARS section by just being good at analysis, because there are a couple gimme questions in there where it's like, what was this person's job? And like, if you can read basic reading skills, you can answer that. But getting a really good CARS score, you have to be good at picking out what they want you to get from the passage, rather than what they're just sort of giving to you in the words, which is the challenging part for a lot of people.
And just to kind of build on CARS, Trinity's Canadian. So Canadian schools have a reputation for being very interested in CARS and really wanting to see CARS skills. I will say that in the United States, it's a little bit different, particularly if English isn't your first language. CARS can be really challenging. So schools know that, and they kind of, I feel like CARS itself gets its own holistic review, especially if your English isn't your first language. Schools understand that, and they will be accommodating to it. So you want to do as well as you can. And I feel like doing as many practice problems and Jack Weston passages really will set you up for success and increase your score. But if you're still struggling in CARS, and there's a reason for that, schools understand that. And that's something you can talk about during your interviews and as you're preparing to apply to med school.
Yeah, if you're at a community college, the minimum your biology, chemistry, physics teachers, every single teacher there has a master's degree. So if you want to set up a journal club, that's something really easy to do. And it's something that your professors would want to do because that's something they've done. They've done science. Most of them, every single one of them have a master's degree, and most of them have PhDs. So yeah, and this is something, because there is like a very specific skill, and the way you learn that skill is by doing research. But if you don't have research on your campus, a journal club is something really easy to do. Well, not really easy. It requires you to be motivated and put yourself out there and convince a professor and get other students to show up. But ultimately, the journal club is like a really great way to do it.
Another question that came up was, how many Anki or Quizlet flashcards will you do a day, and which subjects did you use the flashcards for?
So I use the Miles Down deck, so that has every section outlined it except CARS. So it has a chemistry section, has Gen Chem, organic chemistry, biology, biochemistry, psychology, sociology, and then physics, and then a formulas section. So I did all the new cards before my content review started, and then every day I did copy the thing. I'll put the link to the Miles Down deck in the chat. So the beautiful thing about Anki is it tells you how many you have to do, and you should do how many is recommended, because that's the whole point of their formula, is that you do what's recommended. It's a really popular deck. A lot of people use it, and that is sort of my intro to Anki. But some days you get on there and you feel like the luckiest person alive because there's only like 65 cards due, and sometimes you get on there and there's 270 cards due, and you just kind of have to power through and do them. But then the next day you're not going to have as many. So if you keep on top of it,
and you have 2,800, and you have 2,884 cards.
Yeah, that's how many cards I covered total. Yeah, just under 2,900.
Wow.
Yeah.
Sorry for that one. I was going to say I had I wish I still had that giant stack of flashcards that I wrote myself. I don't. I threw those away the day I got my score back, and I was like, I'm done. I never want to see these cards again. But I found, I'm going to put it online. I found a sheet or like a list of formulas that physics formulas that come up on the MCAT a lot that people recommend really having those ones memorized. So I wrote all of those down, and then on the back of it, I wrote down when that formula would be used, like calculating distance versus time, something like that. And then I would just look at the, what am I trying to calculate? And then I would write out the formula. Or I would do it the backwards. I'd look at the formula and be like, this is used for this. And I did those once a day. I think at the end there, I had like, as I was doing content review too, I was doing full lengths. And if I didn't know the formula, I would make a card for it, even if it wasn't on that list. And then I also use that for the Michaelis-Menten, the biochem equations that come up that you'll see. I can't remember the name of the people, but I'll put that
right.
in the chat. Yeah.
The next question is, how do you describe the Jack Weston card passages to real MCAT cards? Is it easier or similar?
I would say pretty similar. Jack Weston will give you a level of difficulty that each of the passages is. So when you log on, you see it for the day, it'll be like level difficulty 4, level difficulty 5. So it gives you an assessment of the difficulty, and just know that you'll have a range of that on your exams. It's not going to be all the hardest passages you've ever seen, 9 of them lined up in a row. You'll have ones that are a bit easier objectively, and some you'll have that are easier subjectively. So maybe you really like reading about history, and that's great, because if you come across a history one, you're actually going to be interested in it. I would say overall they're pretty representative though, and it gives you everyone that's using Jack Weston that answers that day, it compares you to that day also. So you can see how you're doing in regards to the other people that have done that passage, which will be in the thousands because a lot of people use it. So that'll give you an idea whether you're scoring below average or above average, and how that might play out on curving your exam. If you're consistently scoring above average on most of the cards passages, I would say that's a good sign for how you're going to do on AAMC.
And another question that came up was, did you both use the entire 7.5 hours? Did anyone leave early?
I did not leave early. I used the entire 7.5 hours. Take the breaks that they're giving you. They're there for a reason. Don't feel like you have to rush into the next section. As much as a pain in the butt it was to exit the testing room and turn out my pockets and show them my ID. I'm like, I haven't changed the person I am since you saw me 3 minutes ago, but that's just sort of how it is. Just get used to the time and know what you can do in that time. So know, hey, I can go take a 5-minute walk, and sort of get used to timing that in your head, because that next section is starting whether you're back at your desk or not. So you kind of have to know the timing. But I would say I used the full 7.5 hours, especially compared to my practice. Some of my practices I left early just because, again, the stakes aren't as high, so you don't feel like you're second guessing yourself as much. But use it. Don't feel like you have to rush. It's 7.5 hours for a reason. So.
Yeah, the one thing is that nobody is going to know that you finished early. Like, take advantage of the entire, every second that you have, take advantage of it. And yeah, there's no cookie for finishing early.
I do want to say the way that the exam is, it's the whole thing. If you were to take all the time you needed on every section, it would add up to 7 hours. But if you finish one section, you only have a certain amount of time for each section, and it doesn't bleed over. So say you finish cars in, I don't know, 20 minutes, like you're superhuman or something, and you finish it, that extra time doesn't get added on to the other sections. So I took the full time for everything. And then the Psych Soc, I did finish about 20 minutes early on that one. I went over all my answers. I looked over everything, and I still had a little bit of time. And at that point, that's the last section on the exam. And I was just done. I needed to get out of there. And I reviewed all my answers, and it was one of my stronger sections. So I did leave early, not that much early. And I really would recommend, the nice thing about the practice tests is, especially if you're using them under mock conditions, is that you really get to see your timing, and you get comfortable, especially with cars, to have an idea. I'm going to give myself on average 2 minutes to read the passage, 5 minutes for questions, move on, just to kind of get a timing, because you don't, and like when to flag a question and move on and then come back to it. Because sometimes you're reading something and it just doesn't make any sense and you can't think of the answer, and it's better to just flag that one and then come back to it at the end if you need to, especially if it's a discrete question that's by itself, it's not part of the passage, to just kind of like, you don't want to spend 10 minutes trying to figure out that one problem and then miss out on finishing another 5 questions at the end that you might have had the answer to. So
yeah, I will say I did leave a few minutes early on my psych section. It happened to be one of my stronger sections. It usually only took me about an hour out of the 90 minutes to get through. I just thought it was enjoyable to read. It's a really nice change of pace after you've been reading really dense science articles and the biochem stuff, to switch to something that's a little more real world and you can sort of visualize in your mind. And what the signal for me was to leave that exam was that my last question on my MCAT was complete garbage and unfair. So at that point, I was ready to get out of there. Madeleine talks about this too, because I would contact her from time to time because she had written it before me, is that there are going to be questions on that exam that are test questions that they're testing to see how people do well on. So if you're getting a question, you're like, this is ridiculously difficult, I'm not really getting it from the passage, answer it and move on. Don't harp on one question, because for all you know, it's one of their testing questions and it's not even going to count anyways, because they're really nice and they won't actually tell you which ones that count because they need you to put your full effort into it. So just make sure to answer every question. You have a 1 in 4 chance anyway. So even if you have no clue, it's better than don't leave anything blank. It's really not worth it. And yeah, just know that sometimes it's just time to move on and more is going to come to you and you just kind of got to go. But yeah, for most of the time, I use the full time.
yeah, I forgot about the test questions. I feel like this is something that a lot of people don't know about the MCAT. I think it's like up to 15% of the questions on it are considered test questions. And it's something that the AAMC, they're putting in this content to see how people do on it. And then if it's a good question, they end up using it down the line. So that's why at the AAMC, you sign a lot of forms saying that you're not going to tell anybody about the questions. I know Trinity and I have both been very careful not to actually talk about exactly what we saw on our test, because that's all very protected and you can get your MCAT score voided, especially if you're talking online. They have eyes everywhere. They're looking. So if you're posting about specific questions online and like the answers to it, don't do that because it could come back to haunt you. And a lot of that is because there's these test questions, which don't actually factor into your score, but they might be used on future exams. So like we were saying earlier, you might see something that you have no idea what it is it's talking about. It's completely unfamiliar, and just kind of forgive yourself. Try to narrow it down if possible. If there's some answers that just seem completely out of left field, you can cross those off and hopefully narrow it down to maybe 1 of 2. Give yourself a 50% chance. But for the most part, don't worry too much about the ones that seem completely out of left field, because chances are they might not really be that important. You want to answer them, but don't worry about it and just keep going. It's a test of stamina, and just if you can continue to work on it.
I know you mentioned early that we're not allowed to have calculators or formulas. So how do you know what formulas to memorize?
Yeah, I just put a link in the MCAT formula sheet. These are the ones that I memorized. I would also say as you're doing your practice tests and practical equations, you'll see the formulas that they'll ask about and you'll be like, if you don't know what formula to use when you're taking a practice exam, go back and find the formula and put that in your Anki, put it in your Quizlet, put it on your flashcard, whatever it is, to start memorizing it. So, I think that this MCAT formula sheet, this is the one that I used to make my flashcards, and I thought it was really helpful personally, but it is a lot of information and not all of it's necessary. But if you can, that's a good place to start. And then also as you're going through your practice questions, you'll see, again, some formulas that are used over and over again. Somebody was it the Michaelis-Menten equation of kinetics from biochem? Yes, it was that one. That comes up. Yeah. And then also you're not provided any conversions. So make sure you're really familiar with your unit conversions. A lot of times it'll be as simple as 4 minus 2, but you have to know your unit conversions to know that that's what they're asking you to do. So make sure you're familiar with unit conversions and that you have some basic formulas memorized. They also don't have calculators, are not allowed on the exam, not even simple arithmetic ones, nothing's allowed on the exam, and you are provided with scratch paper.
Yeah, it's like a whiteboard looking situation. So mine was like a little booklet with a dry erase marker. I didn't end up using the full thing because not every question requires something to be written down. And a lot of the functions, when you're going through your exam, you can flag questions. And then when you go to end, you can say review just flagged, and the just flagged ones will pop up. So there's some stuff built into their software that'll help you review. But yeah, you're given scrap paper. And like Madeleine has stressed, know how exponents work, know scientific notation, because that will be your best friend. Try to divide something in your head, but 3,000 divided by this, when you could just do 3 point something divided by 1 point something and use the exponents, you're going to have way less room for error than when you're trying to divide these huge numbers. So just know how scientific notation works. It'll be your best friend when doing the calculus.
And also log.
And logs, yeah. Log rules, exponent rules, all of that. They come up. There was one, shoot, I lost it. Never mind. It'll come back to me. I'll say something if it does.
One of the questions that came up that's really interesting. Does mentorship play a valuable role in one's MCAT success?
I would say to an extent. So I'm first generation. No one in my family knows anything about medicine or really science at all. I'd explain it to them. They think it's great, but it's kind of not in a mean way, but it's over their head. It's not their line of work. They don't get it. So I can tell my mom all I want about my CARS practice and it's cool or whatever, or I can tell her about the biochem equations I'm trying to memorize, but that's not really helpful because she can't really give me any advice. Madeleine had written it before me, so I definitely reached out to her a couple of times. I had a friend who had written it and was successful in applying in Canada, which is quite a rarity these days. So she was definitely a little bit of a resource for me, but everything that everyone else says, take it with a grain of salt, because as Madeleine and I have proved in this presentation, we didn't use the exact same resources or the exact same studying or the exact same timeline or the exact same anything. And we both ended up pretty much at the same spot with our score. So it can be done multiple different ways and tailored to a unique way. So there's definitely some major things that our people keep repeating, which I would say are worth listening to, but don't listen to what everyone else has to say. Especially don't get caught up wasting your study time on Reddit and listening to everyone else's advice, because when it could just be used doing practice questions, it's not a good use of your time.
Yeah, I call people that are on Reddit keyboard warriors, is that they all got like these great things that they haven't done themselves. I think the most important thing is, and I don't know about y'all, but I think like having mentors is like they can't study for you, but have supporters like encourage you. They may not know anything about the MCAT, but they're just happy, shiny people that could encourage you and support, like, you know, somebody bringing you a sandwich or somebody saying, hey, you got a 2-hour break, let's go hang out. Or now, like, don't do it all the time, but people that could support you and lift you up. I would also say, like, avoid people that are Debbie Downers that, you know, oh my God, you know, like they have these like really anecdotes. Oh, I heard my friend's uncle's neighbor that took the MCAT and they bombed it, and, you know, and they won't be a doctor, and they said all of these different things. Like, you don't need those negative people. And I think that's just in general, not just for the MCAT, but like I have somebody that I know, and I really like them, but they're just like, they just drain me after a while. So I just try to avoid them. And it's not that I don't like them, it's just that my mental health doesn't give me the ability or the time to just sit there and hear negativity. And so I just avoid them. And, you know, and it's not somebody that I can cut out of my life, but I just like avoid them as much as I can.
I think with mentorship too, like this is, and it's, I think having people who are taking the exam at the same time of you or have taken the exam before and can kind of, it's a lot and it feels overwhelming, especially I'm like Trinity, where I didn't have anyone that I knew who was in medicine when I was taking the exam. And it was also I took it before PreMedCC was even around. So I didn't have that network yet. So I think it's important to kind of reach out to people that have taken the exam. I think attending events like this, there's other MCAT workshops. They're always a big thing. We have a lot of videos on how to study for the MCAT. I think that's a really good way to get mentorship in a way. I don't think having, a doctor who took the MCAT way back in, 1982, like getting their advice on the MCAT probably won't work for you, but to reach out to, there's resources available and there's people that are taking it, and having a support network of people who have taken it recently or are also studying for it can be really helpful. But again, like Trinity was saying, they can't study it for you. They can't take it for you. There is a level of you having to, prepare yourself for it and to do it. But finding, connecting with people is always helpful.
And finding people that are willing to be open about it. There's a lot of gatekeeping around MCAT results. And one of my friends did this, and he obviously wasn't happy with his score, but was like ultra embarrassed about it. And I'm not pushing him or whatever, but it's not exactly regarded as an easy exam. So if it doesn't go well the first time, you're probably with 80% of people who weren't happy a lot of the time with their scores. So it's not necessarily a rarity. And just finding support and trying to find people that are open about it, because the gatekeeping stuff around it, I just thought was like insane. It's like people, who never want to tell you how much money they make. I think it's kind of weird. Like maybe it's not the first thing you ask somebody, but it's going to come out regardless. So I think finding people who are willing to talk to me about it openly and not sort of tiptoe around it. Like the friend I mentioned, like he was definitely not a good resource for me because I was getting absolutely nothing out of him, which wasn't helpful. So just try a couple questions. If they're not answering it, move on to the next person, because if they're not going to tell you the first time, they're really not going to tell you. So. Yeah,
I joke with my mentor that he took his MCAT with a chisel and rock. And it changes every year. Like I know that, like I think this year or last year was the first year that they don't even give you pen and paper, but they give you that whiteboard, which that takes a little bit used to, or even getting used to the scent. I know that some people are really triggered by scent, and so there's like all of these different things, and having people recently taking it that are willing to be open about sharing it. We've had a person who's the master MCAT person who writes books about it, and you could look on our YouTube channel and our previous events, and he's gone into like much more detail about breaking down everything. But again, it's, and you don't need, like somebody I think on here came in, they said that they hired an MCAT consultant, and I didn't know what that was. And it was just somebody telling you all this information that's out there for free on the website. And you don't need an MCAT consultant. You may need a tutor if you need a tutor, but you don't need an MCAT, which I did not know that existed, by the way.
I have to head out soon, but there's one question that I've seen twice that this is like I think this is super, super important. And we have people asking, when should you take the MCAT? And I'm just going to jump into that really quick. Having done community college and now going into med school, like I feel like this was one of the things that I had no idea about and I didn't realize until I transferred. So if you transfer if you transfer at the end of your sophomore year at a community college and then start university as a junior, a lot of the times people in your junior class will have taken the MCAT that summer before. And the reason is they take it during the summer because that gives them a full summer to study for it, take it at the end. And that's going to be at the summer of the year between sophomore and junior year. They take it then, and then that allows them to retake it if they need to in the future, because you have to apply to medical school 1 year before you actually are going to start. So I applied to medical school last summer and I'm only now going to start this summer. So you need that full year. So ideally, the best time to take the MCAT, from what we've heard from deans of admissions, if you don't want to take any gap years, is to take it the summer between sophomore and junior year. I do not recommend that if you're a community college student. I took biochemistry during my junior year, and I think having taken biochemistry really gave me a leg up on the exam and was really important. And I would not have done as well as I did if I had not taken biochemistry. But because of that, that means I had to take a gap year. And then also it's just COVID and everything happened. So I actually ended up taking the MCAT right after I graduated. And then I took 2 gap years. That way I took the MCAT in August, and then I sent in my application the following summer. So that's a way to do it. That just gave me enough time to retake it during the year if I needed to. But ideally give yourself 2 years between when you take the exam versus when you're going to be starting medical school, if possible. And if that means you need to take gap years, so be it. I'm going to let Trinity talk about it because I know she had a different schedule than I did, but I just wanted to put that in. If you're a community college transfer, it's really, really helpful to give yourself 1 gap year at least, because that lets you take your junior classes, that lets you take upper level biology courses if you're a science major, and then that'll give you a better standing on where you're at and if you need to retake things. I just feel like it gives you wiggle room. So
yeah, community college isn't a thing in Canada, so the transferring process doesn't really exist. You're in a 4-year institution or you're at college. So university is university, college is college. They're 2 different things in Canada, which is, I know, confusing because the language doesn't really transfer over well. But I took mine 2022, was originally planning, the application's a little bit different too. Ours aren't due till October, and there's no advantage of submitting your application early. They don't care whether you submit it when it opens or the day it closes. And I wrote it 2022, was originally planning on applying starting this summer, but now I'm thinking of taking a gap year, which even after taking that gap year that was unplanned, my score is still good, valid for 3 cycles of application. So I feel like hopefully that should be enough. I mean, at that point, I'll be like pushing an age where I'm like thinking of taking that test again, just also is like triggering. So hopefully not. But just don't take it so early. And then if you take it really early and you happen to do really well, you're kind of pigeonholing yourself down the line because your score is only good for so long. So just make sure you time it well so that you know that it gives you a little bit of wiggle room for when to apply and how many cycles your score is going to be good for, because they do expire at some point. So yeah, just be aware of the timing of it.
And
I know, but also Trinity was a transfer student too.
Yeah, I transferred from the US back to Canada. Most of my credits transferred, so there was really no hiccup there. And obviously I'm familiar with what I'm transferring into. I have tons of friends all of my friends except for me went to university in Canada. So there wasn't really that big of a transition period except for the size of my school, but that was honestly pretty negligible, especially when I was doing class from my computer at home because it was COVID. So yeah.
One little thing about taking the MCAT too. I knew a lot of people that registered to take it like in June of the summer that they were planning on applying. So the MCAS application cycle, we're going to go more into this in future sessions, but basically it opens up in June. You want to submit it if you can. That's like the earliest time, and a lot of deans want you to apply early because they're on rolling admission. So it just gives you a stronger chance of getting in if you apply super early. So the people that were taking it in June were applying to schools without having their score back, because it's going to take a month for you to get your score back. So you're applying to schools that, it's expensive. If you aren't scoring where you wanted to, and if you get a lower score than you expected, then you're having wasted money on schools that maybe you don't make the MCAT cutoff. Some schools do have cutoffs on what they accept. So I think, plus then that just, you don't have time to retake it if you need to. You don't have time to make any accommodations. So it's possible to apply without having your MCAT score back and without having taken it yet, but it's really recommended not to. I knew 3 people that I work with during my gap year that did that, and none of them ended up matriculating, and some of them withdrew their applications. It was just a lot to deal with, to also be working and having to study for the exam. It can be a lot. So I would recommend giving yourself that year of, just in case something comes up and you have to retake it. And then also, where you're standing when you're applying.
I guess like one of the last questions that I have is, what did you both do right after the exam ended?
I had my car, I parked, I got on the highway, and I went to go visit my grandma in Toronto for a few days, had dinner with my cousins. I knew I was starting, so I didn't work the first 2 months of the university summer because I wanted to study full time, and wrote it on a Saturday and my work started Monday. So I think that was good, sort of having something to look forward to right after that was going to distract me, because that agonizing wait between the end of your test date and your score can seem really long if you don't have something planned. So I would suggest having something lined up to do that's just going to kind of distract you and be totally not MCAT related for the next little while you wait for your score.
I went to a really nice restaurant and had a lot of pasta and champagne after, and that was what I needed in the moment. And that kept me going through the exam, knowing that I had a reservation at this cute restaurant. I was going to get a lot of pasta and it was going to be great. And then after that, I started working. So I think that was kind of that month, I was focused on the MCAT. That was all I was doing. And then I took it August 7th. My lease ended August 29th, and I had a month just to apply to jobs and start planning my gap years. So yeah, but I feel like definitely having some sort of celebration afterwards, something, I've seen videos of people picking up their friends from the MCAT test center and taking them out to go have fun. And I know personally, I did think about, as I was writing that exam and sitting in that room for 7.5 hours, it definitely cheered me up to know that there was something really fun waiting. No matter how the exam went, it was going to be a good day afterwards.
Yeah, and just sort of being prepared for having whatever reaction you're going to have when it's done, whether it's like complete numbness because you've been doing this exam for 7 hours. Some people like totally just like all the stress just sort of culminates into that minute and you have a little bit of, a moment to yourself in your car and you have whatever reaction you have. Mine was just sort of like, wow, it's over and that's great. And I just kind of got on the highway and went. And, you have a little bit of a superiority status to all those cars next to you in traffic because you're like, I just did something great today. What have you done? So just be proud of yourself for being done and try not to worry about the score because you can't change it. So it is what it is. And you'll see it in a few weeks and worry about that when that comes up. But for the next 4 weeks, just sort of be proud of yourself that you finished and you did this crazy test and hopefully it went well.
And don't start looking up the answers to the ones that you think you got wrong. I did that. I sat outside the test center for like 20 minutes, Googling terms to see if I got it. Don't do that. That's what I did for exams in university. And I'm moving away from that habit because that's just not worth it. You focus on the ones you got wrong instead of thinking about the grand scheme of everything. So definitely congratulate yourself and just try to move on. And like Trinity was saying, it's going to be a tough 6 weeks waiting for your score to come back, but just have something that's going to distract you.
Don't do anything that you get arrested.
No, don't do that.
All righty. Anybody else has any other questions? All right. Well, we're going to have the video is going to be posted. And we're going to try to get all of these links and stuff posted on there as well. I don't know how to do that quite yet, but we will figure it out. All right. Thank you, everyone. Nobody else has any questions? Any last word? Anyone?
You will do great. You'll do better than you'll think you do if you put the amount of work in that you think you will. I had an initial goal score for myself. And then about a month in, I was like, wow, I could do better than that. So I bumped it up a few points and I was happy to like raise that goal and just try to find a little fun in it. You'll find some sections you actually enjoy. Like psych soc was always fun for me. So if I was having a bad day, do a little extra psych soc and sort of ditch the chem viz stuff because I didn't really like that and it was boring. And yeah, but just find the joy in it and know that the reward is so worth the work that you're putting in.
And I want to say the MCAT is one part of your application. I know it feels so daunting, but really what it comes, we've had lots of deans and they always say the same thing is that they look at you as a person. They look at more than just your statistics, your grades. They also look at your journey and how far you've come and what you've done in your life. So, all schools use a holistic review process. And ultimately, at the end of the day, the MCAT, it's part of it, but at the same time, it's not everything. And even if you're not getting the exact score that you want, there's so many more gifts that everybody brings to medicine and so many perspectives that are so important. So just, it's part of it. You have to take it. I'm sorry. I wish we didn't have to take it, but we do. And just do your best, do what you can, and then just be proud of yourself. I mean, you've made it this far. It's amazing. So good luck to everyone. And I hope you get the score that you want. And if you don't, remember, it's just a number. And at the end of the day, you are so much more than numbers.
Very cool. All right. Everyone have a great weekend and see you next time.
Thank you. Bye.